I'm Caitlin Gillis, and today we're going to be going over Romanticism in the 19th century. Romanticism and realism really changed the way the world was viewed. It started in about the 1800s and 1850s in Western Europe, heavily influencing works of literature, visual arts, music, and criticism. The movement itself is in art and thought, focusing on emotion and nature rather than society and reason. More negatively, it took a play on rejection, harmony, balance, idealizations, but also classism to Greek and Roman principles on style and arts. In England, people like Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, and Bryan typified Romanticism, which we'll talk about them a little bit more later. In France, the movement was led by Victor Hugo, who you might know as the man who wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was used as a way to gain a reaction against the Enlightenment and rationalism. The era really emphasized the individual's imagination, personality, and emotion. Following the attitude changes, people grew a deeper appreciation for nature because emotions in general were heightened, but more importantly, it became in short a time of self-examination or self-worth on society's moods. It is worth mentioning as well the interest spike in spiritual truth, both national and ethnic cultures, the good and bad. A lot of it was focused on the medieval era, which you can see throughout a lot of these paintings, especially when it comes to the European artists. Emotions, sometimes even wild emotions, were the key elements of Romanticism. It went beyond just that, though. It also included a wide range of ideas and attitudes. Some of the beliefs that Romantics went off of were the emphasizing of inner feelings, emotions, and imagination, the love of beauty and untamed nature, but also the glorification of heroes and heroic actions. In literature, poetry, music, and paintings were the most influential arts because they were able to capture the emotions of Romanticism, but to Romantics, poetry was the highest form of expression. In Europe, it really consisted of new appreciation towards medieval romance. Romance became a ballad of adventure between heroic characters, which was probably the most key figures of this era. In America, Romanticism was a late bloomer. It actually didn't begin until the 1790s, following the release of lyrical ballads in 1798 by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor, both of which describe spontaneous actions. Germany definitely had some of the greatest well-known romantic writers, an example of this being Johann Wolfgang, insert how you properly say it,
Johann Wolfgang von Goethe,
who was born in 1774, wrote The Sorrows of Young Werther, which was about a sensitive young man whose hopeless love for a married woman leads him to suicide. As mentioned earlier, in France, Victor Hugo led the French Romantics. His work reflected the romantic fascination with history and the individual. His novels, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, showed the struggles of individuals against a hostile society. With all that being said, you're probably wondering now why all this matters. Well, Romantics turned to emotion from society to nature. Overall, they rejected the ordered world of the middle class. Romantic thinkers and writers reacted against the ideals of the Enlightenment, which, as you can probably imagine, created great strain on society. Not only that, but Romanticism and realism are still found in novels, dramas, and film produced today. With that being said, realism. What is realism? Well, realism is the complete opposite of Romanticism. Realism does not beautify or appeal to nature. Before realism, Romantics based literature off of a person's feelings. As revolutions swept Europe in the 1840s, some artists rejected Romanticism in favor of realism. They portrayed common people in everyday life in a realistic manner. In literature and visual arts, realism tried to show life as it was, not as it should be. Realist paintings reflected the increasing political importance of the working class in the 1850s. Taking a step back now and revisiting some of those authors I mentioned earlier, George Gordon, aka Lord Byron, was one of those leading romantic poets of the time, as he also fought for Greece's freedom. Byron was a very fashionable poet. Even as the era's poetic leader, he never lost touch with reality. Due to his abandonment by his father and resentfulness of his mother, who he blamed for his deformed foot, He was depressed from a very young age, which leads many to believe this is the reason for his security and reality. More notably, probably the most well-known author of this time is Jane Austen. She wrote about women in the middle class and very often based her characters off of observations of people she knew. Her novels depict young women entering society, many of whom make mistakes or become confused, but ultimately find their way to a happy marriage. Her best-known works are Sense of Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Emma. In art, nature equaled uncontrollable power and unpredictability. This painting, The Lion Hunt by
Eugène Delacroix,
shows that violence and exotic cultures were also very popular themes. The swirling capes, snarling lions, and bold reds and yellows help convey the intensity and struggle of the hunt. Another artist I included quite a bit in this presentation is Theodore. He was born in 1791 in Rouen to a wealthy middle-class family. It was when he moved to Paris and went through his studies that he struggled with money, seeing as his parents were opposed to the decision to pursue art. Thankfully, his uncle stepped in, who he later acknowledged as his master, and got him through his studies. The vegetarian diet became widely popular due to the health and social class, but also to stick up with the trends of the higher class people. Meals were still separated by your social class as well as determining the meals you ate. At the time, the poor people stuck to bacon, canned food, and bread, while the women's garments became bulkier during the time. They tried to give themselves extra weight above and below the waist to give them an hourglass figure. Along with the heavy and stiff figures of fabric, they used roller print textiles to give their dresses a little bit of pizzazz. The Romantic period is often seen as the reaction to Enlightenment age due to the desire for knowledge. The shift in values allowed men to engage more in democracy, but also to give women a contribution to the era, especially in literature and poetry. People like Mary Wollstonecraft wrote a vindication of the rights of women, which really positioned herself in the masculine role, which was never really done before. Ballet became widely popular during this time as the movements were seen as light and feathery, which was very pretty and beautiful on the women who danced. It mostly included women with not a lot of men. However, when men were involved in the sport, they were mostly choreographers. Last but not least, of course, to put things into more perspective of when they happened and versus of other great eras, we finish with a timeline which kind of takes you through a couple of things that I just mentioned, starting with, of course, the Renaissance in the 1400s to the 1500s, the beginning of the Romanticism era in the 1800s to realism in the 1850s. You kind of get a sense now, hopefully, of when everything happened.